Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here for Safely Engaging Voters in 2021. My name is Caitlin Donnelly. I am the Program Director for Nonprofit Vote, and I'm so glad you could make it today. We have an excellent lineup of speakers, but before I get into that, I want to tell you about some exciting news. We have updated our website. We've made it a little more attractive, but a lot easier to find the resources that you need for your voter engagement activities. So I've got a picture up here of the resource library and the way it's organized and how easy it is to find things now. So I hope you will check it out and let us know what you think of the new look. So as I said, we have great speakers today, and I want to make sure that we have as much time as possible with them. So you will hear from speakers both in the field doing voter engagement work and from behavioral researchers looking at how to keep voters safe last year and as we move forward, because the pandemic is not over yet. So I'm excited to have these speakers. If you have questions for them, please use the Q&A box. That is what I will use to moderate our question and answer session at the end. So I think without further ado, we'll move into Aubrey Hasvold. She is the Advocacy Program Director at Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. Thank you for joining us, Aubrey.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Caitlin, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the lessons that Colorado Coalition for the Homeless learned through our voter engagement last year and what we're anticipating for next year. A little bit of background on the Coalition for the Homeless. We are located in Denver. That's where our hub is, but we are a statewide organization. And we do largely direct service. We provide permanent supportive housing, integrated healthcare, and wraparound services to get people housed and ensure that they're able to remain housed successfully. And then I'm on a small policy and advocacy team. Next slide, please. So one of the big questions that I wanted to answer is, why did we continue to do voter registration during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic? And even though there were some risks and we were all extremely busy responding to that pandemic as a healthcare provider, we figured it was extremely important because we always tell folks that your vote is your voice. Of course, that's a phrase we are all familiar with. And representation can't wait. It was a really important election, and especially given all of the voter suppression efforts on the state and federal levels, it was really essential to have our folks get registered to vote and then get out to the polls. People in the homeless community are more likely to be BIPOC folks, and so there's a really important intersection there with social and economic and racial justice. And so this population is crucial to engage in voter activity. It's also important for us to continue to dispel myths about homelessness and criminal records. A lot of folks that we talk to believe that because they don't have a permanent address or a permanent home, they're not able to vote, but that's just not the case. In Colorado, it's really flexible, and everybody, regardless of your housing status, is able to vote and able to register. And then there's also a lot of misconceptions around criminal records. So a lot of folks who have a past felony will walk right by our table and say, no, thanks, I can't vote. And so by engaging them and telling them about the more flexible opportunities to engage in voter activity, even with a criminal record, that's one of the most powerful things that I think our team is able to do during these voter registration drives. And I've seen people break down in tears just knowing that they're finally able to vote again. And then, of course, this population might not be asked to register to vote anywhere else besides at CCH at our properties. So we have to take advantage of that contact that we have with these individuals. And then with regard to COVID-19, it's really important that the folks that we're engaging have a voice in COVID-19 response and then are able to shape the recovery as we determine where stimulus dollars are going at the state, local, and federal levels. And of course, it's always more impactful if folks are contacting their elected leaders, if they can say, I'm a registered voter in your district. Next slide. So a little bit about our partnerships and strategies that made our registration drive successful last year. We had 18 volunteers that did both in-person and remote outreach. They were phenomenal. This is mostly community members and a few staff members at CCH who were able to dedicate a little bit of their time to helping with these efforts. As far as remote outreach, we used Hustle and Van to do calling and texting. And we created a universe of folks with a lower area median income level in some key counties in the metro area and in more rural parts of the state where we have a larger presence. So we narrowed it to folks with 30% area median income and below to access folks who do happen to have a phone or good connectivity in that way, but who we may not be reaching otherwise through our walk-in centers and healthcare centers. We were also fortunate to have some assistance from the Community Resource Center through volunteers and paid staff assistance. And Jenny in the chat asks, what does CCH mean? My apologies, that's Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. So I'll refer to the organization as CCH or the coalition. We also did in-person outreach, and it was initially looking like we weren't going to be able to do really robust in-person outreach, but as time went on, we were able to be flexible and get people a little bit more comfortable with the idea. And ultimately, we were able to do quite a bit of outreach, not only at CCH or coalition properties, but with other community partners. So we were able to do some outreach at Renaissance Downtown Lofts. That's one of our social impact bond properties. So some of our high acuity folks who live near our downtown campus. And then Stout Street Health Center, which is our main health center. That is usually where we have the most contact with folks kind of floating in and out every year. And so we were really grateful to be able to go there, even though that was the main location where we were doing medical triage for COVID. And so that was a barrier in some ways, but it was also a benefit because we were able to take advantage of that opportunity where there was a lot of traffic to safely engage with folks. We also did some engagement at Fort Lyon, which is our residential recovery center in Southeast Colorado. This is a great captive audience. People go there to live for between 2 and 3 years and deal with substance use challenges and get connected with permanent housing. So everyone there was really excited to have us back. And then another way we're able to kind of make the COVID pandemic useful to us in our efforts is by going to our coalition protective action sites. So these were hotels and motels that we were able to partner with the city to acquire so that folks experiencing homelessness could quarantine and isolate if they tested positive for COVID or were just more vulnerable and wanted to protect them from ever being exposed. And so the folks who were just vulnerable and had not yet been exposed, we were able to bring volunteers to those sites and go door to door and set up in those hotel and motel lobbies and connect with folks, which was really fantastic. The same thing at the Coliseum. That was a large congregate shelter set up in a space in Denver just for COVID-19 response because of all of the challenges that traditional shelters were experiencing. And that was another great captive audience to approach and ask if they wanted to vote or register to vote, excuse me. And as far as some of the techniques we used postcards for all CCH or residential sites. We hung posters at every CCH location. And we also handed out little cards with QR codes for those folks who were more tech savvy and had a smartphone. They were able to scan those and register to vote really quickly. We also engaged in GOTV work, and specifically we're geared towards getting people to turn out to vote and to vote yes on Denver Measure 2B, which increased slightly our sales tax to fund housing and homelessness initiatives. And I see in the chat somebody asked more about Hustle and Van. And those are just some platforms where we could create a universe of people who fit certain criteria. So people who maybe had a higher propensity to vote, and then again, had the certain demographics. And then Hustle, we would put that universe into Hustle and use that to send out texts. And so that's what volunteers were able to help with. Next slide, please. Then, of course, some of the protective measures we used were masks, hand sanitizer. We used painter's tape to mark out a space so that people could keep 6-foot distance. As you can see in this photo, we usually stacked additional tables to kind of create a little bit more space for folks to feel comfortable. And then, of course, we wiped everything down, including our tablets with sanitizing wipes, and gave people pens that were branded to keep. And I would say that our efforts were largely met with gratitude. People are, by and large, really excited that somebody is asking them to register to vote and cares enough to, get them involved and get them civically engaged. I would say that this is the year of all the 5 years that I've worked on a voter registration drive. This is the highest level of interest I've seen. People really recognize this as an important election. And then, of course, there was some fear, largely having to do with the pandemic, which was completely understandable. And then, as usual, this is nothing new, but we tend to have some portion of the population that feels extremely disenfranchised and just doesn't want to have anything to do with government entities, policy, politics. And sometimes we're able to break through, but sometimes those are some pretty deeply ingrained ideas. And then once again, I think the pandemic was a benefit and a challenge. We were able to be creative and not only work around some of the triage and emergency shelter efforts, but also work with them and engage with some of these emergency efforts. Next slide, please. So looking forward, we're not sure exactly what our 2021 efforts are going to look like, but we do know that we want to continue to push to elect individuals who support expanding housing and homelessness resources and protections. And the way we do that is by engaging people experiencing homelessness, also low-income renters. And so that's something that will continue to be a priority for us. We also want to harness the energy from 2020 efforts. Like I mentioned, there was a huge amount of enthusiasm. And so we want to ride that into our future efforts. We also want to engage clients and residents of CCH in our voter registration and GOTV work. We'd love to create space for some of these folks to take leadership positions with this work and really drive our efforts. And then, of course, this is, as we've all been hearing, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to influence the use of stimulus dollars. And so that's really front and center for us. And we think that that's deeply intertwined with this civic engagement, VR and GOTV work. So that's what I've got for you today. My contact information is down here. I will do my best to answer any questions in the Q&A and chat, but feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aubrey. Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, through their partnership with the Colorado Participation Project. If you were at our last webinar, benefits of doing voter engagement during local elections, you heard from Alex McHenry at Colorado Participation Project. So these are two valuable partners of ours that we worked with in 2020, and I think this year again. And our next speaker has just joined on to be a partner in our field program for 2021. So I am excited to pass the mic to Dr. Bambie Hayes-Brown. She is the president and CEO of Georgia Advancing Communities Together. Thanks so much for being here, Bambie.
Hello, hopefully you all can hear me okay. I am in rural Georgia right now, where bandwidth is a little low, but hopefully you all can see me and hear me okay. I am Dr. Bambie Hayes-Brown with Georgia Advancing Communities Together, also known as Georgia ACT. Next slide. And just briefly about Georgia ACT, we are a statewide membership organization that represents the state's nonprofit housing and community development organizations. And our mission is we build, support, and inform a statewide network of thriving organizations, professionals, and individuals advancing equitable housing and community development. And our vision is for all Georgia families to have safe and decent housing in vibrant neighborhoods. And we do this through our four-pronged strategy, which is Act Connect, where we connect nonprofit industry leaders in affordable housing and community development. We have networking activities. We also do policy and advocacy around affordable housing and community development on the state and local level, as well as the federal level. At Capacity, where we seek greater resources for the nonprofit housing and community development industry. And our latest is ACT Engagement, where we have begun doing direct civic engagement and voter engagement. Next slide. Georgia ACT, we are traditionally not a direct service provider, but at the end of 2019, we really saw a unique opportunity coming up to the presidential elections to get more involved in the voter engagement process. So we received training from the New Georgia Project, which their office is right next doors to ours in downtown Atlanta. We are based in Atlanta, but we are truly a statewide organization. And for those of you who don't know, Georgia is a really big state. It has 159 counties. And so we try to service all of those counties, but with a special emphasis with rural and southern Georgia. So we started out registering people to vote at the MARTA stations around Metro Atlanta. And then it just grew from there. We had an opportunity with one of our national partners, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, to embark upon an Our Homes, Our Votes to get more renters out to vote for the presidential election in 2020. But who knew that we would have a pandemic? So a lot of the things that we initially had planned for our Homes, Our Votes campaign, we had to postpone those because there was just a lot of uncertainty. So we did pivot and begin doing some Zoom candidate forums with several of our partners, including NAACP branches, civic organizations, chambers of commerce, as well as other grassroots community organizations, where we partner with doing numerous Zoom voter engagement activities, primarily candidate forums. But as time went on, and when we around April of 2020, people began to, I guess, get fatigue of being inside and wanted to come outside. So some of our partners who primarily had an older population of volunteers decided not to engage, which was totally understandable. But we did get some partners that wanted to engage, and we looked at the time what was safe for people, and so it was safe. It was safer to be outside, and by that time there was more production of PPE, personal protective equipment. So we started to purchase those PPE kits, complete with masks, gloves, hand sanitizers, and we began to reach out to our network. We have about 75 members throughout the state of Georgia and numerous other partners. And so we began to reach out to those partners and our members to say, hey, who wants to do some voter engagement, especially in South Georgia? Because we knew there were so many partners and so many groups that were doing Metro Atlanta. But we wanted to make sure that we targeted those really small communities and those smaller urban communities that are often ignored. So some of the challenges that we faced was community trust. So, who's Georgia Act and who are these people from Atlanta coming into our community? Because some of the things that we've heard was no one has ever done anything like this before. And lack of understanding rural and southern Georgia needs. Rural Georgia and southern Georgia is very unique in its needs, as different from Atlanta and Metro Atlanta. Even though a lot of things are the same, there's poverty, housing challenges, low-paying jobs, but there's a lot of farm and agriculture here. A lot of Black farmers. A lot of times when people think of farmers, they think of only white farmers, but there are also Black farmers. But then we also had the geographical distances. Again, I mentioned Georgia has 159 counties, and you can drive for miles and miles and miles and still be in the same county and have not left that county. And then fear, but not in the sense of fear of the pandemic, but what would happen if they come out to vote, especially for the Black and brown community, because there's a serious fear that if people come out to vote, then there will be backlash from their employer or from other people in the community who hold the power and the control in the communities. So if they go out and vote and engage in these activities, and what's going to happen after we've all packed up and gone back to Atlanta. So those were some of the challenges that we faced. But we really sat down and thought about, okay, how can we work around this? So you'll see the photo on the left with the tent. That was where we partnered with the city of Rochelle, Georgia, with their mayor and their city council person to do some voter engagement outside, along with census. So we actually purchased laptop computers, and we had hotspots that actually worked. It took us a little bit to find which carrier would work for that area, but we did find a carrier where we could get a great signal, and we were able to both sign up people for people completed the census, and they also registered to vote. And of course, we had food and hot dogs, and this was out at a local church in a very visible community that was right across the street from a Dollar General. And so the Dollar General is like the main store in this town. So we're talking about really, really small towns with populations from 1,300 and above. And then on your right, you'll see where we partnered with a local sorority in Southeast Georgia to set up a digital billboard. So you see some co-branding with this sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, as well as the Our Homes, Our Votes 2020. And so this was along the I-95 South corridor. So this was a way that people can see, hey, we need you to vote. It's a serious matter, as well as working with those local leaders in partnership with the census. Next slide. And our strategy, our main strategy was finding those trusted partners in rural Georgia. And most of those trusted partners were faith-based collaboratives. Georgia Act, we were introduced to this group called Fresh Communities. And Fresh Communities is based out of Waycross, Georgia. And they had a partnership with one of our members called Sawega Rising, and Sawega is short for Southwest Georgia. And the executive director said, okay, you all are doing the same things. We need you all to come together. And that's what we did. And so we sat down, and Reverend Pharrell Malone, who is the CEO of Fresh Communities, had this huge faith-based collaboration of pastors. And we know in Southern Georgia, it's the Bible Belt, pastors are those trusted partners in these communities and in rural Georgia. So we began to have strategy sessions on how we are going to reach out to people, how we're going to do this engagement. So we came up with a strategy to do a 66 county tour around Georgia, going into the communities, making sure that our bus is visible. He had the bus, we had a little bit of funding, so we put our resources together, and we had what we would call team leads, and those team leads were responsible for finding those trusted leaders in each of those counties and collaborating with getting the people out. But it wasn't by Facebook, it wasn't by Twitter, it was good old fashioned word of mouth. And that's what was so profound, because in Southern Georgia, um, the broadband infrastructure is really, really weak. And so we had to kind of go back to those old school things of picking up the phones, calling people. And so that's what we did. And we found those common interests of people. Again, jobs, um, uh, housing, all of those things, education, that are important to people, that people wanted to get out to vote. And again, I talk about this Underground Railroad system because I'm originally from rural South Georgia, and I understand a lot of the dynamics as opposed to a lot of my counterparts who are based in Atlanta. And we did have an incident in a town in Southeast Georgia near the Florida line, where the word got out about our caravan that was coming through to register people to vote and rally people to come out. And we were met by a not so friendly crowd, is what I will say. They were quite hostile, but we kept going. We pushed through, we did it. And we came back and said, hey, you know what? We have to come back. We have to make sure that our volunteers are safe, not just from the pandemic, but from other people who may try to stop people from voting. And we had to hire security. And that's what we did for throughout the final, the second half of our tour. And again, we made sure that all of the events were outside. We had PPE, personal protective equipment. We had swag. So if you see all of us that are in the picture on the left, we're close together, but we have on our mask. And this is outside. Next slide. So to build on that, we came back again, Georgia Act, Fresh Communities, Black Voters Matter, Sawega Rising, some of our partners. We came back together and said, hey, we want to continue this for 2021. So let's put together our 3V Liberation Tour: votes, vaccines, and visions, where we're again going into 42 cities, again in rural South Georgia, and registering people to vote, talking about the vaccine, where they can access the vaccine, as well as the vision. With so much funds that are coming down from the American Rescue Plan, we want people to become involved, to be involved, and go to their local elected officials and say, hey, we want to give some input on how we want this money to be spent. And so we build upon this 2020 interest of in elections, where Georgia before was not a swing state, and then it became a swing state overnight, and then it turned from red to blue. And of course, Georgia Act, we are nonpartisan, but our main focus is to get people out to vote, and meeting people where they are. So rather than having people come to us, we would come to them in each of these communities. And then if there's a local festival or community event that's going on, we have partnered with them. As you'll see on the left, there was an Eastside Community Day in Valdosta, Georgia. We brought in this mobile gaming center for the youth, where they can come in and play video games, because children come, they're going to bring their parents. So we want it to be family friendly. And then the next picture we had, where people were able to register for the Affordable Care Act and to get insurance in the rural communities, because a lot of people don't have insurance. A lot of rural hospitals are closing. And so people are relying more on clinics. But since these federal dollars are coming down, and President Biden has extended the enrollment period for the Affordable Care Act, we want people to be insured. And then on my far right, is Fort Valley State University. So partnering with our historically Black colleges and universities, they have a mobile technology trailer that they have been traveling with us during this tour to bring this mobile technology into these local and rural communities. And it is equipped with chairs, it is equipped with laptops, and people can actually come in and use the computers if they don't have a computer or internet access. And everything is sanitized, cleaned, wiped down consistently. So we make sure that even though I'm fully vaccinated, I still continue to wear my mask, but people are beginning to get more and more comfortable. And so this is a just unique way of bringing in all of these different groups, HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. I tend to have use acronyms a lot. Bringing this tractor trailer into the communities, using a mobile gaming trailer to help get our young people out, going into the communities with the local festivals, combining this information with how people can get information on being vaccinated, how people can sign up for insurance. So using a more holistic approach, thinking outside of the box, but also at the same time using those old school methods of basically word of mouth, getting those trusted people in the community to help us get the community out. And so I'll be glad to answer any questions in the Q&A and in the chat, as well as any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bambie Hayes-Brown, for your work and for this presentation. It really expands what we think about when we talk about safely engaging voters, to also be thinking about your physical safety when you go into communities where your efforts might not be as appreciated by everyone, as well as health and the vaccine and Medicare signups. So it's given us a bigger picture of what safely engaging voters looks like. And I want to zoom out a little more even with our next presenter, who will be talking about how voters should be engaged safely, not only by our nonprofit organizations, but by election officials in the system at large. So I am pleased to pass the mic now to Omar Parbhoo, the Vice President at Ideas 42. Omar, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Caitlin. Appreciate it. I really appreciate it, being invited to speak today. I'm not sure if there's a slide before this, but maybe not. I appreciate being here and also being able to talk about how we've been encouraging people to turn out and be safe in 2020. But it's great that this conversation is continuing, because it's tempting to put the pandemic behind us. I know at least I'm ready to pretend like things are back to normal, but clearly that's not the case. So I'm excited to share what we've learned over the last year with all of you. But first, let me just share a little bit about Ideas 42. Our name is not very descriptive, so I want to describe who we are. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit that applies the latest in psychology, behavioral economics, and neuroscience to tackle big social issues. So we started just over a dozen years ago and have grown in size and scope, and we're now the largest applied behavioral science firm in the US. And we work on topics such as global health, financial inclusion, economic justice, and of course, civic engagement. So specifically, I want to talk about the core of our civic engagement work, which is this voter innovation lab. Our mission is to use behavioral science to help bring about a more vibrant and multiracial democracy. And specifically, we believe that with better voter-centered design, we can achieve a large, sustained increase in turnout and see an electorate that looks like the country as a whole. And the way we go about this is by doing a ton of research and trying to identify the psychological and environmental barriers to voting and how those differ between communities. And then we do design sessions to find solutions that equitably empower voters, test those solutions, and then iterate as needed. And then finally, we take what we've learned and scale those with our partners. And those partners include election officials from secretaries of state all the way down to local clerks, but also other nonprofits who have the ability to reach voters where they are. So let me take a moment to talk about the barriers, or alternatively, the conditions that are necessary for someone to vote. And this could be really high level, but it's a helpful framework for us to think about how we keep people engaged and actually turn out. So looking at these three conditions, the first is that voting should be easy. And what we mean by that is that people shouldn't have to travel far or wait in long lines. But similarly, they shouldn't have to struggle to make voting fit into their busy lives. They should have the flexibility in how they vote to ensure that casting a ballot can be reasonably done alongside their other competing priorities. But in addition to applying good voting policy, we need to make sure voters are aware of the options that are available to them. It's not helpful to have flexible voting options if a large number of voters don't know what they are. Second, this may seem overly obvious, but voting should be meaningful. And there are a lot of dimensions to this. So obviously, if people think they can effectuate change in their community, that's a great thing. But even if the outcome is a given, people can find voting personally meaningful. For example, somebody can say it's my civic duty, or socially meaningful because they vote with others. They can go vote with their church, or it's something that they know that others around them would ask if they had voted or not. So they have that level of accountability. And lastly, voting should be safe. Before 2020, we mostly focused on ensuring people were safe from intimidation or harassment. But of course, with the pandemic, safety took on a whole new meaning and intensity. So what I want to share with you today is how we use behavioral science to help voters quickly adapt to a new and unfamiliar environment for casting a ballot. So first, let me take us back. If we can go to the next slide, please, to the first months of the pandemic and how hard it was for people to adapt to public health recommendations. The struggle we as a society faced was a cautionary tale for us. We saw that despite the risks, people had a hard time changing behaviors, and that was playing out across the country. So, it's easy to blame individuals, but the problems were largely a result of confused messaging and garbled signals. In other words, we were hearing competing recommendations that changed all the time. But when messaging was consistent and clear, people adapted. So, for example, can everyone just take a moment silently to themselves and think about the answer to this one question? How many feet should people stand apart when practicing social distancing? I'm pretty sure that people quickly came up with the right answer, which is 6 feet, which is consistently posted everywhere. That has been the number of feet that has been used almost exclusively in messaging since the beginning of 2020. Now, here's another question. If you're fully vaccinated, does your local grocery store require you to wear a mask if you go into it today? Just to be totally honest, I was trying to figure out the answer before this presentation, and I'm not sure what it is in my area. And that's because the answer to this question has changed. The rules have been changing a lot lately, and it's different from location to location, and it's different based on people's comfort level. So that level of confusion can leave people unsure of what they're supposed to do and what's expected of them. And unfortunately, voting is more similar to the grocery store example because the rules around voting are obscure and they shift all the time, and every state has its own set of policies. So the question is, how do we get ahead of that problem? And that's what we were focused on in 2020. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Last year, what we did was mobilize very quickly to develop a range of solutions, but we focused on three main themes. First, we knew we needed to reduce uncertainty. If voters weren't clear on what was expected of them, things would fall apart. Second, we wanted to make sure that safe voting options were more accessible and appealing. So these options were typically the least familiar to voters, so we had to change mental models about how someone could or should cast a ballot. Third, we wanted to address misinformation and use trusted messengers to get out the facts. I was really happy to see how Dr. Hayes-Brown talked about the trusted messengers they use and engaged in their work. It's so critical to addressing a lot of the issues we saw around safety, and especially getting ahead of a lot of the misinformation that's out there. And so what we did was we developed and applied these solutions with the partners in the fields, but we also created a Safe Voter Playbook, which is on our website at the address that you see on the slide, which has a lot of off-the-shelf recommendations for a range of get out the vote activities. But let me highlight a few examples that address the three themes I laid out. So first, reducing uncertainty. On the next slide, please. We produced a comprehensive guide to communicating with voters during the pandemic. It pulled in the latest research on how to effectively deliver messages that needed to get out and broke it out into 3 categories. Number 1 was capturing attention. The next was delivering the information. And third was facilitating action. And you can find the entire guide on the website, on the playbook itself. But let me focus on that last page, which is facilitating action. We know that providing information isn't enough. It needs to be communicated in a way that allows someone to act in that moment, or the opportunity could be lost. So to that end, we needed to explain how to communicate communicate to people so that it's timely, clear, actionable, and supportive, and provides details to people in a way that allows them to follow through on things. So let me share one example of how we applied these recommendations in the field. And specifically, this is in California. So on the next slide, I want to talk about this program that we did in California. But first, a little bit of context. California, for a while, has been moving to a more robust vote by mail system. But because of the pandemic, they put that transition into high gear in 2020. So to get voters ready, we helped the Secretary of State design an email campaign that helped voters get the information they needed one step at a time. So, for example, one of the earliest emails was around confirming mailing addresses, since ballots were going to be mailed out. We needed to make sure that people were up to date on their registration so that their ballots wouldn't go to an old mailbox. But we also sent this one on the screen here, which is an email to encourage people to track their ballots. We made sure to send it at the right moment, made the ask and the benefit of signing up very, very clear, and displayed that blue button with that little icon to make the action one click away. Plus, if anybody had any questions or needed support, we normalized that ask and told them where to go. But this is as much an art as it is a science, so we tested different variants using these recommendations to see what would work best. And sure enough, on the next slide, you'll see that all the variants ended up performing very, very well. Those spikes that you see are the signups that correspond with when the email was sent out. And the different lines represent the different variants. So the dark blue line is overall what we saw. We saw about 250,000 new signups just from this email outreach. But if we use the best variant that applied those recommendations in the way that reached people and captured attention, we would have seen close to 400,000 new signups for ballot tracking. So these communications are really important, but making sure that they're done in a way that facilitates action is key to getting people to take new steps that are unfamiliar to them. All right, go to the next slide. I want to move on to how do we make voting options more appealing and accessible. So we said we needed to change mental models of how people view their ballots. So what we did was made the idea of requesting a mail ballot a natural extension of existing behavioral change. So because of the pandemic, people were now washing their hands more often. They were wearing masks, keeping a social distance. So it only made sense that it would also vote safely at home. And we saw promising success from this framing. We basically turned a decision about whether or not to vote by mail into a default for those who already decided to be extra cautious about their health. So now the question going into 2021 is, how do we understand what the way people have changed their behaviors? How are people now viewing health precautions, and making sure that we frame safe voting options in those terms? And the next slide, I can show another way that we make different options appealing, and that's by normalizing the behavior and showing that others around you are also taking safe actions. So this graphic on the left is not something we ended up implementing. It was something we were thinking about presenting to different social media companies. But basically, it was trying to show people a counter of like how many people around you have actually returned their mail ballot, so that we can get people to send it back earlier than the deadline. But the underpinning idea it remains powerful and true, which is that when people see others around them doing something, it provides social proof that this is something that you should do as well. But a few tips to keep in mind that we've learned from research on how to apply social norms and proof properly is, first, we have to make the right behaviors visible. A lot of times what we end up doing is assuming people know that others are also taking a certain action, which is not the case. We've seen a lot of really important work around energy use in houses. And when we show neighbors how much others in their neighborhood are using in terms of energy, they end up changing their behaviors because that is not a very visible behavior. We don't know how much people are using the AC or not unless you're in their home. So it's important to make things like voting, which is by nature private, visible in some way or another. The next is to find a relevant peer group. You don't want to do something that's so broad that it doesn't feel relevant to somebody. And you also want to make sure that the peer group that you're highlighting feels resonant to who they are and their identity. So this example on the left actually is too large of a peer group, but if you can imagine somebody, for me, other people living in Washington, D.C. would feel more appropriate. And you can, the examples of like other people in South Georgia feel more of a peer group potentially than people in Atlanta. So finding that right grouping is critical. And then lastly, delivering that information people can actually act. It's not about telling people what they should do in a moment where they have to remember it and take that action in the far future. It's delivering it when they can take that action right then and there. So finally, I want to talk about addressing misinformation. We all know it's out there, and whether it's intentional or not, it can undermine our best laid plans. So what's so dangerous about misinformation is not necessarily that people will believe fanciful things, but rather that people will not know what to believe and just throw up their hands. So the good news is with some vigilance, we can get out ahead of misinformation. It's tricky, but we try to distill as much of the research as possible into an easy guide. So again, on our website, we have this guide that talks about getting ahead of misinformation, focusing on the facts, explaining how it works, amplifying and repeating. And we provide basically a checklist of do's and don'ts on what somebody should do when addressing all of these different areas. And we also have examples of how to deal with misinformation. But I want to focus on the trusted messenger as a key avenue of addressing misinformation and breaking through the din. So I love the examples that were already cited, but I just want to quickly go to the next slide and show something that we were trying to do, which is using a trusted messenger to show and not necessarily just tell where possible. So especially with polling places, which we knew a lot of people wanted to vote in person because that's what they had done, that's what they had trusted. There was still a lot of fear because of the health concerns. And there was a question of whether these places were actually safe. So we were hoping to get trusted messengers in communities to go into polling places early, post pictures about the health precautions, explain why they felt safe, and also encourage others to follow suit. So this is a way of delivering to people the information that they need to feel safe, but from somebody they can trust and with concrete details and examples so that they know that it's true. So I will stop there in the interest of making sure that we have time for a Q&A. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Omar. This is really great messaging guidance around the safety piece and behavioral-based research. Definitely fits in with our model at Nonprofit Vote, and I think you see traces of it in our partners' work. So I'm glad we were able to present this as well as all our presenters today. I think you all did such a great job that people are feeling like incredible and amazed and maybe not the most questions right now. It was so good that I think we were all just enjoying listening. But we actually just got a good one in the chat. Somebody says, for many, 2021 is an off year in terms of elections. However, it seems like a good time for driving voter registration. Is this most effectively done in tandem with redistricting process or other methods for engaging the community? Why don't we start with Aubrey, and can you speak a little bit to how you combine the voter registration with other sort of civic engagement and opportunities and activities?
Great question. So yeah, I think this can be a really important time for registration being an off year for some folks. I think with what I've noticed with our population is that it is a little bit harder to capture people's attention in off years because they're more often seeing the big headlines during those really big high consequence elections that are kind of in your face. So it's usually a little bit of a smaller effort for us, but I think it can be an important time. And then to the point about combining it with other efforts, I think Dr. Hayes-Brown described pairing it with other efforts too. And that is really powerful. We also paired it with some census work as well, and this last year. And so I think that anytime that there's some cross-pollination there, that can be really valuable.
Great. Bambi, do you have examples?
Yes, I would totally agree. We here in Georgia, there is no off year for us because you have your municipal elections, and then you have your state elections, and then you have your your presidential elections. So it's just continuously for us. So we've really kind of switched to focusing on those local elections that are just as important, and really getting that messaging out, along with those things such as getting ready to go to Fort Valley, Georgia, as soon as we hang up to attend a community resource fair. And so I think it's very important wherever you can piggyback and partner with other organizations to get the word out about voting, and then make a big deal out of it. I mean, we were in Valdosta. This young lady came over to the booth and she said, I'm not registered, but I really want to vote. And so I want to get registered. And we made a huge deal out of it. She was just so, just so happy and just so excited. And we were clapping and cheering. And so that garnered other people's like, okay, what's going on over there? Let's find out what's going on. And we registered several people to vote. So I think it's very important if you can piggyback with other activities, events. I think that is very beneficial.
Thanks. I will also say that yes, voter registration should absolutely be taking place right now, but voter education is critical to getting people to turn out in the local election years. But whether you're trying to register voters or educate them on what's on the ballot, you need to actually find those voters. So, Aubrey talked about the service population. Bambi talked about the tour. We had somebody asking, Omar, how did you get the emails and get in contact with the voters?
Yeah, so we work very closely with partner organizations because they have touch points already, and they are the ones with the relationships that are so important. So in the example that I provided with the email, that was with the Secretary of State's office, and people proactively and optionally give their email address when registering. And we ended up having something around like 6 million email addresses that, of course, the Secretary of State handled. They're the ones who sent it out. We never got access to them for good reason. But, it's those existing relationships that we try to leverage instead of trying to create them from scratch or try to do cold emails.
Yeah, I think those local partnerships are absolutely key. We have another question. Donna is asking how any of you have dealt with issues of connecting with people for whom English is a second language and they may not speak or read much English, and how you navigate the language barrier, but also the trust. Anyone want to start us off on that question?
Georgia Act, we are a membership organization, and our membership throughout the state is pretty diverse. And so that's where I think the partnering with other groups and such as one of our members, Los Vientos de Buford Highway, is a trusted partner in the Latinx community. And so I think it's very important that when we look at our ecosystem, we have to look at our entire ecosystem. And so they were a trusted partner with the both Latinx community as well as with Georgia Act. And so that is a way, I think, of really pulling in those partners. And then also with the local school systems. We don't talk about that enough. Because with our local school systems and our counselors, we have our parent liaison where I live in Clayton County, and she is bilingual. And so she has helped me tremendously with getting the word out also to our Latinx population, where English is not their first language. And she's very trusted. If she sends an email or tells them to come, they come. If she tells them to read it, they read it. And so it's just been a great partnership. I think sometimes also looking at some of your non-traditional partners, such as your school systems as well.
Thank you.
I would just add that we rely a lot on our staff, including our case managers, to help kind of be that bridge for folks who don't speak English as a first language or are not as comfortable with that. So that's a really, really important partnership, even though it's just an internal one. Working together in that way has been really valuable and helps use that trust that's already been developed between case management and folks accessing services. And then we always print our materials in Spanish and English. The paper voter forms are in Spanish and English. And then we often try to also translate everything into Arabic and Somali as well, because we have some properties that are heavy with those languages.
Thank you. I have a question from someone. This one is a little looking to the future. So it is about what you each might anticipate being the same or different this year with changing public health and safety protocols. They also asked, what are the prospects for future vote by mail? If anyone doesn't know, Colorado is a vote by mail state. So people who are registered to vote automatically get their ballots mailed, whereas Georgia has just introduced some new limitations. And then, so I'd love to have either of you speak about anything you anticipate changing. And then I'm not sure if this is your area of expertise, Omar, but if you could talk about maybe what might happen in other states or what organizations nationally are thinking about as laws and protocols change, for more access or less, depending on where you are. So I made that confusing. So let's start. Aubrey, are there any changes that you thinking are going to happen in Colorado as a result of, these public health concerns?
I don't think that it's going to be a major barrier for us. I think that we did a good job kind of working out the kinks last year and feeling out what was comfortable, what was not, what made people feel safe and willing to engage with us. And I think especially because at our health centers, we were also doing vaccinations, that a lot of our population is now vaccinated and feeling really protected. So I think it'll just continue to get easier for us, hopefully, and people will be just as comfortable as they ever have been.
Great.
As far as your question about like voting by mail, we're really lucky in Colorado to have kind of a national model for voting as far as voting by mail and just how easy it is and how many different avenues people can take to do it. So yeah, I think that has been really crucial for our population. One thing that's also really been valuable is the ability to collect others' ballots for them once they've been completed and drop those off. And we usually have a big day where everyone brings their ballots in, puts them in a basket, and then our volunteers each can take 10 to the polls and we all walk together and it's a good time. But yeah, I know in some places that's not an option. So we're pretty fortunate.
Thank you. I think Omar has to jump in a moment. So Omar, can you just, what are you hearing about like what's happening sort of nationally and how groups are preparing for maybe fluctuations in policy?
No, I appreciate it, Caitlin, and sorry for having to run off, but it's been really interesting to see the amount of attention that's being placed in an odd year on elections, and it's good that people are taking it very seriously, that these restrictive laws are going to be problematic, and this is an opportunity to capture the energy from a year with record turnout and a lot of new ways that voters have engaged their electoral system. What we look at is like, how do we turn voting by mail into a habit now instead of this one-off moment where people did it only because of a health concern? It should be something that people can engage with going forward. So we're working with organizations like National Voter Home Institute and other national organizations that are coming together as a consortium to think through ways of standing as a bulwark against policies that limit access, but also ensuring that voters have the right information going forward, just like they did in 2020, but in every election as well. So they don't think it's just a blip.
Thank you, Omar. I know you have to run. I appreciate it. And everyone will have Omar's slides in the follow-up email if you want to get in touch with him.
Thank you.
So I think I want to wrap us up with Bambie. There were a couple people actually, I think, asking about what is Georgia Act going to do and how is the recent legislation going to impact your work?
Yes, so as you know, Senate Bill 202 did pass and was signed into law, which restricted a lot of access to voting here in Georgia. But that's the purpose of this 3V Liberation Tour. So we are, as far as the health, really encouraging people to get vaccinated and get their vaccines. I think around Georgia's about 50% right now. We really want it to be in line with the current administration's percentage of 70%. But also, again, making sure people are registered to vote. And as we go out, people who say they're registered to vote, we're having them to double check and make sure that they have not been purged from the voting rolls. And then also, especially in these larger counties that are rural communities, as well as those counties who are large populations who are having their drop boxes reduced, really working creatively to get people out to vote. And one thing that we've done in one community in Georgia is solicited the help of funeral homes. So funeral homes, they do have limousines. And so I tell people it's not your final ride, but they do have limousines that have space. And they have actually taken people to the polls during the 2020 election and the 2021 runoff. So it's just really being creative and thinking outside of the box and making sure people get to the polls.
Thank you, Bambie. Thank you, Aubrey. Thank you also to our ASL interpreters, Vanessa and Paula. This has been another great Nonprofit Vote webinar, and check your email next week for the follow-up materials. In the meantime, check us out on social media at NPVote, and we will see you here for our next webinar, which should be in July. Everyone have a great afternoon.